before another St Theodore. See Theodore Stratelates as St Theodore. St Theodore of Amasea is one of the two saints called Theodore, who were venerated as warrior saints and great martyrs in the Eastern Orthodox Church. He is also known as Theodore Tyron. The other saint of the same name is Theodore Stratelates, also known as Theodore of Heraclea, but this second St Theodore may never have had a separate existence. When the epithet is omitted, the reference is usually to St Theodore of Amasea. Tiro is a word from Classical Latin meaning a recently enlisted soldier or recruit. The Latin word was transliterated into Greek with various spellings. Life and martyrdom. Nothing reliable is known about St Theodore except that he was martyred in the early 4th century. The stories told about his life and martyrdom are all matters of myth and legend. The legends of Theodore of Amasea recount that he was a recruit serving in the Roman army at Amasea, which is the modern Amasya in northern Turkey, about 30 miles south of the Black Sea coast at Sinope, and Samson set free after a warning. However, he again protested paganism by setting fire to the temple of Cybele at Amasea. He was then condemned to death and, after tortures, was executed by being thrown into a furnace. His remains were said to have been obtained by a woman from Uzbek and interred at Ukiita, where he had been born. This was a Byzantine city which no longer exists but is thought to correspond to the modern of Hat, which is about 30 miles from Amasea. A shrine was erected there, which became an important place of pilgrimage. Gregory of Nyssa preached in honor of St Theodore in his sanctuary in the late 4th century, and this is the earliest source for any information about him. He said nothing about St Theodore's life beyond the basic legend as given above, but he told how he could influence the lives of his hearers and specifically mentioned that he could intervene in battles. This became a particularly important attribute of St Theodore. He was adopted by Crusaders as the patron. The sanctuary of the saint was established at Ukiita, possibly his birthplace, and legends of his life and martyrdom have been developed by hagiographers over the years. Later additions to the story, between the 8th and 10th centuries, told of a dragon who was terrorizing the district round Amasea, which he was able to vanquish with the aid of a cross. Amasea was by then in a district liable to attacks by marauding barbarians, against whom the saint was said to have interceded. His sanctuary continued to be visited until around 1100, although the district was by then occupied by the Arabs. In Western Christianity, he is usually called Theodore of Amasea, from the ancient city in Pontus where he suffered martyrdom. Sometimes he is called Theodore Ukiita, for the place where he was possibly born and to which his body had been carried, and where his shrine was erected later. In Eastern Christianity, he is more often known as Theodore Tyron, Theodore the Recruit. There is much confusion between him and St Theodore Stratelates of Heraclea, who is also sometimes said to have had a shrine at Ukiita, but the shrine of the latter was in fact at Ukineia. Veneration. St Theodore became especially important in the Eastern Orthodox Church, where his cult spread widely. The first church dedicated to him in Constantinople was built in 452, and eventually he had 15 churches in the city. He was famous in Syria, Palestine and Asia Minor. Many churches of the Eastern Orthodox Church are dedicated to him. In Italy he was shown in a mosaic in the apse of the Church of SS, Cosmas and Amp Damian in Rome, and by the next century, he had his own church there at the foot of the Palatine, circular in shape. People brought the sick children to his temple, as to an Asclepieion, or healing temple. This church of Saint Theodore was made a collegiate church by Pope Felix IV and was made available to the Orthodox Church in Rome by Pope John Paul II in 2000. This was inaugurated in 2004. He became the first patron of Venice. The chapel of the Doge was dedicated to him until, in the 9th century, Venice wished to free itself from the influence of Byzantium, and he was succeeded by St. Mark. He was not popular in northern Europe beyond Italy. However, Chartres Cathedral in France has a stained glass window with a series of 38 panels celebrating St. Theodore, which date from the 13th century. Gallery. Iconography and feast days. In mosaics and icons, he is most often shown in military dress from the 6th century, but sometimes in civilian court dress. When on horseback, he is always in military dress, possibly spearing a dragon, and often accompanied by St. George. Both he and St. Theodore Stratelates are shown with thick black hair and pointed beards. In the Eastern Church, St. Theodore of Amasea is celebrated on the 8th of February or on the 17th of February or on the first Saturday in Lent. In the Western Church, his date was the 9th of November, but after the Second Vatican Council and since 1969, he is no longer liturgically celebrated except in certain local calendars. Relics of the saint were widely distributed. In the 12th century, his body was said to have been transferred to Brindisi, and he is there honored as patron. His head is said to be enshrined at Gaeta. His encounter with a dragon was transferred to the more widely venerated St. George. The two St. Theodores. Numerous conflicting legends grew up about the life and martyrdom of St. Theodore, so that, in order to bring some consistency into the stories, it seems to have been assumed that there must have been two different saints, St. Theodore Tyron of Amasea and St. Theodore Stratelates of Heraclea. There is much confusion between these two saints, and each of them is sometimes said to have had a shrine at Ucaeta in Pontus. In fact, the shrine existed before any distinction was made between these two saints. The separate shrine of Stratelates was at Ucaeta, a different place. They were distinguished at least by the 9th century. However, it is now generally accepted, at least in the West, that there was in fact only one St. Theodore. Hippolyte del Hay wrote in 1909 that the existence of the second Theodore had not been historically established, and Walter in 2003 wrote that the Stratelates is surely a fiction. There were several churches dedicated to both saints, Theodore Tyron and Theodore Stratelates. For instance, at Dobasco, and it says, at the monastery of Cupriano at Constantinople and at Pergamon. St. Theodore and Venice. St. Theodore was the patron saint of Venice before the relics of St. Mark were brought to the city in 828. The original chapel of the Doge was dedicated to St. Theodore, though, after the translation of the relics of St. Mark, it was superseded by the Church of St. Mark. There is some doubt whether this first patron of Venice was St. Theodore of Amasea or St. Theodore Stratelates, but Otto Demas in 1960, in his authoritative book, The Church of San Marco in Venice, stated positively that he was St. Theodore Stratelates of Heraclea, and he is followed in this by Fenelon. However, in his later book on the mosaics of San Marco, Otto Demas points out that none of the 12th century mosaics which show St. Theodore mentions more than his name, and it is suggested that he may have become the patron of the city before the two saints were distinguished. In fact, the Venetians never appear to have made any distinction between the different St. Theodores. None of the mosaics in St. Mark's Basilica show him in military dress. There were 15 churches in Constantinople dedicated to St. Theodore, who was a Greek saint, specially venerated by the Eastern Church. Venice had originally been a subject city of the Eastern Roman Empire, and the Venetians saw St. Theodore as a symbol of the subjection to Constantinople. The adoption of St. Mark as the patron helped to establish their independence. The new church of St Mark was built between the old chapel of St Theodore and the ducal palace. When this was enlarged and rebuilt in the late 11th century, the chapel of St Theodore disappeared in the rebuilding. There is today a small chapel dedicated to St Theodore behind St Mark's Church, but this was not built until 1486. The two Byzantine columns in the Piazzetta in Venice were set up soon after 1172. The eastern column bears a strange animal representing the winged lion of St Mark. A statue representing St Theodore was placed on the western column in 1372, but this was not the statue now to be seen there, which is a composite of several fragments, some antique, including a crocodile to represent a dragon, and was placed there in the second half of the 15th century. Reputed relics of St Theodore were taken from Mesembria by a Venetian admiral in 1257 and, after being first placed in a Venetian church in Constantinople, were brought to Venice in 1267. They were placed in the Church of San Salvatore, St Theodore Saturday. The Orthodox Church and those Eastern Catholic churches which follow the Byzantine rite celebrate a miracle attributed to Saint Theodore Tyron on the first Saturday of Great Lent. At the end of the pre-sanctified liturgy on Friday evening, a special canon to Saint Theodore, composed by St John of Damascus, is chanted. Then the priest blesses Coliva, which is distributed to the faithful in commemoration of the following miracle worked by Saint Theodore on the first Saturday of Great Lent. 50 years after the death of St Theodore, the Emperor Julian the Apostate commanded the governor of Constantinople during the first week of Great Lent to sprinkle all the food provisions in the marketplace with the blood offered to pagan idols, knowing that the people would be hungry after the strict fasting of the first week. Thus he would force the Christians to unknowingly eat food polluted with the blood of idolatry. St Theodore appeared in a dream to the Archbishop of Constantinople, Eudoxius, ordering him to inform all the Christians that no one should buy anything at the market, but rather to boil the wheat they had at home and eat it sweetened with honey. After the service, the coliva is distributed to all who are present, and, after Holy Communion and the Antidoron, is the first food eaten after the strict fasting of the first week. Given what we know of Roman pagan ritual and mores, the story is almost certainly apocryphal.